This week, I'm joined by John David Graham, founder of Good Samaritan Home and author of Running as Fast as I Can. John shares how being fired from a church led him to open a single shelter that grew into 21 homes, offering dignity, second chances, and the simple power of making your bed. Okay, let's go. John, thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. You are an author and you are the executive director of the Good Samaritan Home. Can you tell us what that is?
Good Samaritan Home is a 501c3 nonprofit. I started this 24 years ago because I saw a need in the community with the homeless population that was knocking on my door. And I either I wasn't equipped or I was inhibited to do something to help. And at the time, I was a minister, and my congregation felt like those people were not part of our purview. And so I was discouraged from helping the street people. And ultimately, I was released from the church because of it.
Mm.
And out of that, instead of losing my job, I decided to create a whole new world of we ended up buying a house, the cheapest, oldest house we could find, and converting it into a homeless shelter and starting Good Samaritan Home. And that was the beginning with no money, but nothing but a need in the community.
And then how did that come about? I mean, it's one thing to have this vision, it's one thing to purchase the home. Then what happened?
Well, I've been through a whole lot of careers because I had a degree early on, like most of us coming out of the 60s, but liberal arts means exactly that. It's a very broad education that really doesn't qualify you for anything specific. And so I ended up going from I was a truck driver, I was a children's home counselor, I was a building contractor, I was a door-to-door salesman, I was a lot of even a fireman at one point, and then a journalist, and finally a minister, all of which I probably didn't do that well until I asked the question, what is the need in the community? Instead of saying, what do I want to do? I asked the question, what needs to be done? And that's when the idea of helping people who were struggling more than me. So we started Good Samaritan Home with the intent of helping people get off the street and maybe develop some degree of stability and hopefully be at a younger age than I was, people who were struggling more than I was.
Hmm.
And ironically, I found that in helping this population, I found my purpose.
That's amazing. And when you were helping these individuals on the street, did you find that there was a common thread of what led them there?
Well, I would say the common thread would be family dysfunction.
Mhm.
Uh, and and this is here's the irony is that we like to think of family abuse or as being extreme, but many times it's growing up without any support system.
And so you started with one home. How did the community react to this house and who it was serving?
Initially, like one man said, when I heard a minister was going to buy a house in neighborhood, this house hadn't been touched in 100 years. He thought this is a great thing, and still we started bringing in people off the street. But what happened was that I had been volunteering at a local prison, just trying to be help in some level. They asked me because of our shelter, could we take people coming from prison and could we offer them temporary housing and then we would then be compensated for that. So it was because there was no money
Mhm.
in a homeless shelter. I was 5 years with no income, so I contracted with the Ohio Department of Correction to take one or two or three persons coming from prison who were under the guidance of the parole officer. And it sounded like a noble thing to do because you're obviously taking somebody who needs shelter and you're giving them structure.
Mhm.
So, from my perspective and the parole department's perspective, it was win win. But what the neighbors, some of them felt was, why are you bringing those people into my neighborhood? And those people were always perceived of as being outsiders. And you have to factor in race
Mm-hmm.
because every time you watch the news, you always see somebody getting arrested who looks not like me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a racial factor to everything in criminal justice. And so we started off with this one, we were going to take one man into our house who was a black man. And immediately there were petitions
Mm.
to the city council and there were protests. And then the city council would meet and then there were interviews by the local television station. And then there were threats. And then there were ordinances passed trying to shut us down. And I even had police protection at one point because it was so intense. And we ended up, it took us overall 7 years of legal action. And at one point, and I was even stabbed by some mentally deranged man who was trying to protect, from his perspective, trying to protect the community from me. And I was stabbed in front of the courthouse.
Mm.
So what we found, though, was that rather than try to fight back like we're seeing in so much politics today, instead of name calling, instead of blaming the other, the innocuous other, what we decided to do was try to do what Nelson Mandela did and Bishop Tutu did, was try to win people through our faith expressed through acts of kindness. And for us, it was cleaning the entire block with a snowblower in winter. It was cleaning up our house. It was painting the house and restoring it to the way it used to be. It was being a good neighbor. And eventually, it took time, but eventually those same people who used to wave at us with one finger, if you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
they ultimately waved with all their fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able, in time, win over the community, one person at a time. And now we actually take referrals from the local courthouse.
Mhm.
Instead of going to jail, they are referred to our house to save local tax money.
Wow.
So in that respect, an immediate, obvious benefit that people, taxpayers can see. I like to say that it's something even the Democrats and the Republicans can agree on because everybody's saving money.
Which is rare these days. And once someone joins their new home, the Good Samaritan Home, is there a program or what does life become for them?
Well, we don't offer programming as such. We don't do counseling. We don't do drug rehabilitation. We partner with existing programs,
Mhm.
but the missing element is housing. So what we offer is temporary free housing, but with oversight. There's curfew, there's responsibilities. For example, we don't cook your meals. We provide you a place where
Mhm.
you can cook your own meals.
Mhm.
And you're responsible to clean after yourself and you're responsible to make your bed, which sounds
Sure.
silly, but I can't see what's going on in your head, but I can see what's going on in your bed. And if you make your bed, that tells me you did something right today. And it's actually the idea of making a bed is a respect issue.
Mhm.
It says I respect myself and I respect my roommate enough to clean my part of the crib.
Mhm.
And it's a Navy SEAL trick where in Navy SEAL training, they run you through weeks and weeks and weeks of rigorous discipline training. And at the end of the day, you feel like you've done everything wrong. But if you come back to a made bed, what you say is, I did something right today.
Mhm.
And so in the Navy, the idea of making a bed was the beginning of making your life.
Mm.
And that's how we regard it. It's a made bed is a made life. You can control your bed. You can't control getting a job.
Right.
So it's an incremental way of finding success.
Yeah, I love that.
And it in the past 25 years, we've had 2,500 men and women come through our houses because now we have 21 different houses. It's
Hmm.
grown that much. And we've found that we don't try to counsel, but we try to mentor or
Hmm.
encourage. And one of the ways we encourage is through housekeeping because it's a way of saying, I did something right today.
Yeah. And you have that control of your environment, right? Like this is somewhere that you're proud of, that
Correct.
you want to live in. It is your home. And that's a wonderful thing. So, and is there a particular time limit that people have? Like, is it 90 days or does it depend on the individual?
Well, in theory, it's 90 days because we're partnered or contracted with the state of Ohio, so they fund us, and their guidelines call for 90 days. But at the end of 90 days, there's an extension request.
Mhm.
And what you do is you fill out a form that says, "This is what I've done with my time, and if I can get an extension, these extra 30 days will help me find a job or
Mm.
find a house." So the average stay is pushing a year.
Okay. Yeah.
And but the idea is it's not where you can simply set for a year. You have to be working towards a goal.
Mhm.
We call it independent housing.
Mhm.
And it's not just free housing.
Right.
You earn it by trying to find your way to your own apartment,
Mhm.
trying to find a job. And we had one fellow who stayed with us 14 years.
Wow.
He was 67 years old when he came to us, and he was nearly frozen to death in the winter. And he not only survived the winter with us, but he stayed a year, 2 years, 3 years. And when he eventually died at the age of 81, he said, "This was the only home I ever had."
Mhm.
And to me, that was a success. We gave
Absolutely.
him a safe place to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
And
fact that I'm still talking about him now.
yeah. And when you think about 90 days for someone who's experiencing homelessness or coming out of prison, that doesn't seem like a long time at all for someone to I can only imagine as someone myself who has, a safety net and skills and things like that, 90 days to get your life back in order doesn't feel like enough time. So,
But not
yeah, so the
at
the
all.
1-year
It,
extension doesn't or the 1-year stay doesn't surprise me at all. Can you talk about some of the challenges that your residents face and overcome?
it sounds simple. We say to somebody, well, you need to go out and get a job.
Mm,
But we deal with people who may never have filled out a job application. Or when they did fill it out, it says, have you been convicted of a felony? And
mhm,
they check yes, there's a very good chance that they're passed over
mhm,
because it's, and I understand why an employer would say that because why should he take a chance on somebody who could prove a financial or physical risk to his employees? So what we try to show them is that what you can control is you can show up for your interview. You can you can you can fill out the application appropriately. In fact, what we have in Dayton, Ohio, is the nearest community, and there's a reentry class where they're taught how to fill out a job application, and they're even provided a free suit to wear for graduation. So they have 8 weeks of training, and we partner with that training. And so maybe as many as 10 or 12 of our residents will go through these classes every 8 weeks. And and then they can find jobs through the connections that the county offers. So together we can help overcome those barriers. And and the truth is that what we tell people is that what they're really looking for, even though they may be apprehensive with your felony, what they really want to know is, will you show up every day to work?
yeah,
If you show up on time and give them 8 hours work, I guarantee you, you can keep that job because the employer is looking for one thing only, somebody who's worth what he's paying.
mhm,
And if you're showing up and doing your job, they will keep you.
right,
And it in general, that's been true. But then again, they have to learn to show up on time.
right.
And again, you and I think it's a normal thing we all know, but most that we deal with don't know that because I slept in, or it wasn't my fault that I missed the bus,
Hmm.
or I didn't feel good. And what we tell people is, unless you're coughing up a lung, you go to work
Right. Right.
because that's all they can measure is you show up.
Right. And when you're talking about individuals who are more than likely coming from environments where they didn't have that structure, where, they didn't have a lot of the skills that we learn in childhood and early adulthood, something like just showing up to work, to many people feel like, yeah, obvious. But like you said, it starts with making your bed in the morning. Let's get into a routine. Let's get discipline. And it sounds so easy, but I also think about everything that this individual has been through up until this point, and I'm not in a place to judge whatsoever. They're in a place now where, there are neighbors and they're getting their lives together and being productive and all of that. But I bet it's pretty difficult. I mean, I can only imagine what the emotional state, the mental state of many of the residents are probably going through.
I would say between 60 and 80% of the persons we deal with are dealing with either alcohol or drug addiction.
Mhm.
And so we don't actually look at the crime that they've committed because whether you've committed a drug offense or if you committed a violent offense or even a sexual offense, that may have happened 30 years ago. I want to know where you are today and
Mhm.
how can we help you today? And there's so many reasons that people are apprehensive with somebody. Chris Christopherson had a song once about. He said that everybody has to have somebody they can look down on,
Mm.
and in our culture, we do that by saying, "At least I'm not him or her," and we find reasons to reject that person. So we have to work twice as hard to overcome that felony,
Mhm.
and it's skewed against that second chance. So what we keep encouraging people is that you will be rejected. You will have, for example, the background check. You may work very hard for 30 days, then the corporate background check comes through and you're let go, and it's
Mhm.
not your fault.
Mhm.
How are you going to handle that?
Mhm.
Are you going to roll over and quit? Are you going to do something stupid? Or are you going to get up and do it again with another job? And that's what we try to encourage them.
Yeah.
That's the mentoring.
That's amazing. And how is let me ask this the right way, and if I'm not asking it the right way, please feel free to correct me, but what is the recidivism rate of residents? Do you find that the housing along with the programming tends to work for these individuals?
The University of Cincinnati did a study originally back in 2000
Mhm.
that was the basis for what we call the Ohio Plan.
Okay.
And they found that the primary need getting out of prison was housing. If they have stable housing, then you can get a job, and then you can pay taxes, and then you can pay your child support. Then you can buy goods in the community. Then you can stay out of prison. But without housing, none of that works. So we provide the housing element, and all the other things tend to fall in place. So recidivism in Ohio has dropped. I don't have the exact figures, but it's gone from give or take 50% down to well below 30%.
Wow.
And the key issue is community, some sort of oversight. It's not in the prison, it's in the community.
Mhm.
Because if if it costs me $106 a day to house somebody in prison, but if they are in the community and it costs a third of that for temporary housing, but they are now working, they're paying taxes, they're paying child support, and they are no longer a tax burden, they're a taxpayer.
Mhm.
So everybody wins.
Right.
It makes economic sense to have something in the community instead of just in prison.
Right. And outside of the economic benefit, which I know is what we are so focused on in our country, and for, I think for many good reasons, I guess. Taking that aside, there's a dignity that they get restored and being part of a community in a really positive way. I used
Yeah.
to live in DC and we had community housing, again, 90-day temporary housing. You could extend it, and it was in houses. You could be right next door to one. And what ended up happening is these were just your neighbors. They were people that you saw walking to the metro station with you, and there was a different kind of support, and these individuals felt part of the community because they were. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but I always think of this Mother Teresa quote that I'll paraphrase, and it's, "If we don't have peace, it's because we've forgotten we belong to each other." And it feels like what this is doing is that reminder of we belong to each other. And one of the things that you said is calloused hands with a tender heart. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and just talk a little bit more about that?
I've made a lot of mistakes, not the felony mistakes, but I was 53 years old. I'd been homeless when I was single and near homeless again with a family because of my career mistakes. And my kids have paid the price for it because we moved through 4 different states, 8 different careers, and that's tough on children, particularly teenagers. And the good news is that my 2 children started off at a different plane where they found a job and they found a house and stayed with it for 30 years because they didn't wanna make the same mistakes I did. So in that respect, I was very successful passing on a better plane to my children. But I'm very aware that there are people who we like to say, "Just don't do that again," or "Just go out and get a job." But it's like saying, "I want you to go to Hollywood and become an actress."
Right. Just
That
go do
sounds
it.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're very talented, you can do that. And the truth is that 95% of actors are unemployed for that reason. So, and the people we deal with, we say, "Just get a job," without some sort of support system. They just don't have the tools. And if I didn't have the tools, how much more so somebody who comes from a dysfunctional family?
Mhm.
And which ironically, well, I try to share that message. And it's like today, we talk in politics, we talk about political terms like democracy, or we talk about oligarchy, or we talk about autocracy, and people don't hear it. What they hear is my groceries cost more than they used to. It's a very felt, their politics is very personal. And so what I tried to do was when I would go to the city council and try to explain the need to help the poor or help somebody coming from prison, what I literally heard from educated people, even attorneys, they would say, "That's fine, but not in my backyard,
Mhm.
not here. Send them somewhere out in the country,
Mhm.
somewhere where they're away from everybody," which is the exact opposite of what they need. And so what I ended up doing was every time I would explain with all the data, you could see people glazing over.
Mhm.
What I decided to do was, how do I tell this second chance story? Because each second chance is a universal need. If all of us, some degree, are broken, if all of us have made mistakes to some degree, how do I tell that story? So I ended up doing something I had wanted to do all my life was write a fiction novel.
Mhm.
And for the next 10 years, I wrote a novel about second chances, and I made it very personal, very real, but fiction. And the end result was not only was it well received by the critics, but it was the reviews coming back where I felt Daniel's story. I felt like I lived that story. I cried and laughed through the whole story. And it has done more to share the idea of second chance, this idea of calloused hands and a tender heart, than anything I can say with my data.
Mhm.
And so I've been very pleased with the reception we've gotten with the novel.
And that's Running as Fast as I Can, correct? The name of the novel?
Yes.
Yes. And so
Yes.
for
And
anyone watching, it's right behind you, but anyone just listening, it's Running as Fast as I Can. And was that based on real, I mean, it's fiction, but was it based on real people's experiences that you had interacted with?
It's absolutely based on real people, but it's not real people's story.
Right.
In fact, I had one reader wrote, she said, I thought it was a memoir until the last page, and I realized it was fiction. It felt so real to her.
Hmm.
And because real life is happy and sad, and it's good and bad. And and what people identified with was Daniel Robinson is his name. And he was brought up in a home where he was abused by his father, ignored by his mother who was mentally ill, and ultimately abused by his pastor.
Hmm.
So he grew up in a dysfunctional situation, and he spent the next years trying to find where he fit in because he had no tools. And what I found was this is most of us. We're dealt a short hand of cards, and we say, I don't know how to play the game. I
Hmm.
don't know what to do. And therefore, we make mistakes. And what I found is most of the people who abuse others were abused themselves, and this is their normal. So we're trying to teach them to act totally different than anything they've ever known.
Hmm.
And that's the story of running as fast as I can is I call it everyone's story because on some level I believe man or woman you can identify growing up in a home where you felt like you were alone and you felt like you were running. This is the best I can do, but I can't catch up with what I call normal people,
Hmm.
the people who seem to get it all so easily.
Right.
And why can't I? What's wrong with me? And it's not your fault. You've been dealt a short hand.
Right. And I think something that you said is so important because the people that we're talking about now are adults, but they're learning new skills. And when we watch, let's say, a baby learning how to walk, we don't shame them for falling over, right? They get back up and they keep
Right.
going and they fall. And yet we expect something very different as we age. And these are individuals that are learning new things and trying to do something differently than they have before. We should be expecting stumbles along the way. And so many times I think we expect, like you said, go to Hollywood and be an actor, right? Like it's just so easy that the power of storytelling can really help open people's eyes to the realities, even though this is a fiction book, but the realities of circumstances.
Well, let me give you an example.
Mhm.
When I went to the city council meetings and I would present the data about reentry, the recidivism numbers, and I could show factually that what we were doing was not only a good thing, but a necessary thing.
Mhm.
And nobody heard that because I compare it to if I were to present to you a documentary on lifeboat safety and say, here's how we man our lifeboats, here's why we have them, here's how you row them, and here I want you to learn all about lifeboats. Nobody on the Norwegian cruise line would ever pay attention. But let's suppose I would take that lifeboat safety documentary and I would have Jack and Rose and a love story, and all of a sudden, I've got people crying and excited, and they're saying, "Come on, Jack! I know you can do it. I know you
Right.
can make it, Rose." And we would still be talking about it because we took a story about lifeboat safety and made it into an emotional story. That's what running as fast as I can is. It's a story about second chances, but it's told through the eyes of Daniel and Kate,
Mhm.
two broken people who learn how to lean on one another
Mm.
so they can walk straight.
Mm.
And that's why people are crying and laughing when they read it.
Right. That's wonderful. And I think so much we're talking about community in the United States and finding community and building community. Can you talk about what leadership means to you as someone who saw a need and did something about it, which to me is real leadership. Can you talk a little bit about that of how individuals can build community and how when you see a problem, instead of,
Mhm.
talking in platitudes or, saying, well, that's a real shame, how can people take that first step in making a difference?
Even though I grew up in the white community, I still grew up in the 60s. And a great deal of my subliminal messaging in the 60s was not in the protests of Abbie Hoffman, but in the sermons of Dr. King.
Mhm.
Because what Dr. King did was he said, I'm not just talking about what you should do. I'm talking about what we together must do.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's not about, he said, it's not do you love or hate. It's do you love or do you die?
Mm.
Because you don't have an option here. And he literally put his life on the line with that. And maybe even the best example was John Lewis, who eventually went into Congress and spent his entire life trying to make a difference in the structure. And he would be in the halls of Congress with people who were clearly opposed to him, people who were talking about him and behind his back about him, who were highly critical of him. And he said, I always made a point of calling them brother, because if I don't treat them as my brother, they will change me. And I cannot afford to become like that. And to the day he died, he lived his faith and he lived his belief. And so that to me is what leadership was. It's lived example of what you believe. And I'll be quite candid. I was telling my wife today that I grew up in the 60s, in the 70s. I lived through Watergate. I lived through all the emotional ups and downs. I was at Kent State on the day of the shootings. I wasn't involved in protests. I was there to see a girl. So I know what it's like to see the world come apart in violence. I was working in Detroit following the Detroit riots. I know what racial hatred is about. And what I saw was that we survived that because we still had this idea of leadership. We still had people who were able to make moral decisions. And maybe the best example is Jimmy Carter.
Mhm.
He was criticized at the time, but now he's revered as the best living ex-president we've had because he lived in practical ways what he believed to be the moral thing to do.
Mhm.
I'm not convinced that we have that leadership today.
Mhm.
And I'm very concerned that the people we expect to make the moral decisions are making the expedient decisions. They're compromising what they know to be wrong. And to be quite candid, it reminds me a great deal of what it was like in 1932 in Germany,
Mhm.
where good, moral sons and daughters of Martin Luther were saying and doing things and allowing things that were reprehensible to their belief system.
Mhm.
But they did it because they felt pressure.
Mhm.
And this, I think today it's probably the most critical time in our history for the voice, not just of the church, but of moral people to be the living example of morality,
Mhm.
not just the lip service.
Right.
This idea of a Christian nationalism, I find very, very dangerous
Yeah.
because the history since the church became part of the Roman Empire has shown how easy it is to compromise what the church believes to be true in the name of power.
Mhm.
And I think this is where we are being, I call it the fourth temptation in the wilderness.
Mm.
We are being tempted with the idea of being on the throne, but at the cost will be, it costs us our souls, I believe.
What I love about this conversation and what you've done is we can all lead and we can all be great because we can all serve, right? And stop
Yeah, there it is,
looking,
right there.
yeah, and stop looking to others and do something, you know? And that's something, it can be small. It doesn't have to be even what you did, right? Like start small in your community and speak up and live that. I think the word moral might turn people off, but that moral truth of we belong to each other. We really do. And the only difference between ourselves and others oftentimes is where we were born. I mean, we have no control over that. Where we were born and who we were born to. And this other rising is just really frightening to me.
To speak up, but not in the same anger. We have to set the example of how, like Dr. King would talk about, that we have to be the example with our actual living.
Hmm.
He called it a soul force. It's not about equality. It's about loving your neighbor. If your neighbor is created by the same God you believe in, that makes your neighbor, no matter what color he or she is, that makes him or her your brother and sister. And when I do my writing in Texas, and in South Texas, I'm a minority. I'm 35% of the population
Hmm.
because it's 65% Hispanic.
Hmm.
And when I walk into a restaurant, they speak Spanish and I have to follow along because I don't speak it naturally.
Hmm.
And I'm the minority.
Right.
And it reminds me that in the world, that it's not white power. And it's very humbling. Let's put it
Yes.
that way.
Yes. Yes.
And I I think that
You and I are both white, and we're both the global minority, which sometimes you forget living in the United States.
that's exactly right. In fact, I've heard a joke once that a man died, and he said he when he died, he appeared before God, and God spoke to him and gave him a message to take back to people. And so he was talking to his priest, and the priest said, "Well, what did God tell you?" And the man said, "Well, she said, 'Buenos dias, señor.'" Yeah, because our conception of God is in our image. We create God in our image, but God is in God's image.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's us who have to do the adapting.
Right.
And I think a lot of us are going to be very surprised in eternity.
Yeah. And, I think the other thing that has threaded through this conversation as well is when we lead and when we are of service to others, it doesn't mean perfection, right? There are going to be missteps, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be stumbles, and that's all part of the process. We don't have to be perfect in order to lead.
And I was just thinking here that we've had quite a more than normal amount of religious talk in this
Mhm.
conversation, and ironically, it's actually the underpinning of the motivation of behind. I don't require someone to be religious.
Mhm.
I don't require church attendance. I don't require faith, but I do require that my faith motivate what I do.
Mhm.
And so my faith has to make an impact on the way I act and how I treat you.
Right.
And I think if the church were to do that, I think we would see a whole different discussion going on in our country today. Instead of pointing fingers at those people because they act different, dress different, we deal with this whole transgender issue in our houses. And I have my opinions about it, but it's irrelevant to a homeless person. You need a place to sleep. And how you what I like to say is, yeah, I don't care what side of the plate you bat from.
Mhm.
I do expect you to keep the home plate clean. That's all. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
Because the key question is, what is your need? You need a safe place to sleep.
Mhm.
And if I can offer that, then that's what I'm required to do.
Yeah.
Not point my finger and not expect you to look like me and act like me, but I expect you to have a safe place and to respect yourself enough to keep it clean.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think that, the other thing that in this conversation that we haven't talked about is, and we're seeing it in DC with the homeless encampments being removed, and people's homes, they just are tents and enclosures being removed. And we've
Yeah.
heard this in major cities of busing housing insecure people out, and the way that cities are being designed now to hopefully not prevent homelessness, but prevent homeless encampments. And I think, again, what gets lost in all of this is there's never, not one day. I'm 42 years old. I'll be 43 in January. There's never been one day in my life where I didn't know where I was gonna sleep. Not one day in my life.
Yeah.
And whether that was because I have a safety net out of individuals that I could turn to, or a car, or like, I don't think people stop and think about the absolute, the word I keep thinking of is terror, but what that must feel like if you don't know where you're going to stay. If your option is a bench, I mean that it's something many of us can identify with. And to villainize individuals who are in that situation is is pretty tough. I think we need to look at ourselves if we're those individuals who are demonizing this.
When I met my wife, I was living in my truck at the time. I had converted it to a camper,
Mhm.
and my major goal was finding a place to park at night. And winter was coming in, and you start looking, and then they repossessed the truck
Mm.
because I wasn't working, I lost my payments, and then you start saying, "What's the weather like? Where am I going to sleep tonight?" And everything. The idea of getting a job is irrelevant because how can you get a job if you don't know where you're sleeping? And I was raised in what I call working class or lower middle class.
Mhm.
So I was raised with a work ethic.
Mhm.
But if I could get caught into that, how much more so people who came from far less? And it just the idea of just saying, just get a job.
Right.
It sounds great and it may get you votes, but it just doesn't work.
Right. And I've
Just doesn't
I've
work.
I've said this. I grew up poor to the lowest echelon of middle class. And my mom did work to get out of that and, single mom and she cleaned houses on the weekends and we were raised with an amazing work ethic and she gave us absolutely everything she could. And what I tell people is it's expensive to be poor. It's very expensive to be poor. And to your point, it's not only now you're looking at the weather, put on top of that, are you eating? It's all these other factors that start taking over all of your priorities. If you're filling out a job application, what's the address? How do they contact you? Do you have an email address? Do you have a phone number? It's so much more complicated than what you said at the very easy blanket statement that gets you votes or gets you out of caring, frankly, and doing something about it, right? It's very easy to say, just do this versus stopping and thinking about what someone else's life and experience is and how, again, if you can volunteer time, an hour a week, that can make a huge difference in someone's life and build from there. But I think we excuse ourselves from the solutions oftentimes by just making assumptions and judgments.
I deal with virtually everybody gets food stamps that we
Mhm.
deal with. And there's a natural response thinking, why am I paying for your food? Why am I, why don't you buy your own food? But if you get a job, let's suppose you get a job on Monday, you don't get paid for 1 week, if not 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then you have to have a bank to cash the check. And some people have never had a bank. And so they end up going to Walmart paying 5 to 10% of their check for cash services.
Mhm.
And and then if you have to have a deposit for your apartment. And then you can't even get a job without a phone. So now, fortunately, we have what's called an Obama phone,
Mhm.
where you are given a free phone because our culture dictates that you can't work without a phone, and it's a mobile phone.
Sure.
There are no want ads in the paper anymore.
Right.
If I want people to work, if I want them paying taxes, there are certain investments that I have to make as a community, and one of which is food stamps, and the second thing is a phone.
Mhm.
But in the end, it pays for itself.
Correct.
We just have to look beyond the immediate.
100%. 100%. Now, one thing that I do wanna touch on is your wife and how supportive wife Kathy, is that her name?
Kathy.
Kathy. So, Kathy has been with you through, it sounds like, ups and downs and twists and turns. Can you talk a little bit about her support and what it's meant to you?
Well, both of us come from what I call having a limp. We all come with our own weaknesses, our own damage, and we've learned to lean on one another. And when I met my wife and we were dating, her friend said, "Don't date him. he's not a good influence on you. And her pastor refused to marry us. And so I went to a college friend who was a minister, and I said, if you don't marry us, I'm going to tell your parishioners what you were like in college. So I blackmailed him and he married us. And we've been together now for 48 years.
Oh, wow.
So what I like to do is I like to send an anniversary card to all her friends saying, see, we made it. So
That's so great.
a lot of it is it's not just, we are in many ways, we're quite different, but we're both similar in one respect. We both lean on one another. And that's the critical element. And the truth is she's my best friend.
Mhm.
And right now I'm going through some health issues. And so she's carrying me.
Mhm.
But when she was going through her health issues, I carried her.
Mhm.
And when I was in the construction business, I was a contractor. And if I would put a floor down, she would come in and work behind me to clean up behind that floor or grout that tile.
Mhm.
And and right now, in fact, she's probably one of my hardest working maintenance men we have because she'll get up at 5 in the morning and go, and I'll find her patching drywall or scrubbing a toilet. And the best example was we had a house where the sewer line from the city backed up into our apartment and literally flooded the apartment with raw sewage, human sewage. And it was so bad that the professional companies wouldn't clean it. She cleaned it.
Oh my gosh.
She went in and cleaned it. Now that to me that's not just working, that's devotion. That's being a team.
Yeah.
And when we first started, she was a manager at McDonald's. We lived on her salary because we had no income from me.
Mhm.
And we lived in a house under construction for 14 years while we were starting Good Samaritan Home.
Wow.
And she lived in that mess.
Yeah.
And it's a team effort. So in fact, in my novel at the end, I gave her all the credit because I said I could not have written this story without her.
Mm.
And that's truth. She's not around to listen to me now, so I'm saying it's a sincere statement. She is
Yeah.
my best friend.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's really incredible. And for individuals who may be, feeling sort of stuck in their own cycles and setbacks and just, maybe have a little bit of a limp right now, what advice would you give them to get started?
If you want to talk about starting a nonprofit, that I can give you a macro definition. I would say, what is the need in the community,
Mhm.
and how can you help meet need?
Mhm.
Instead of saying, I want to go in, I want to help you do this. What do you need? But if you're trying to restart your own life,
Mhm.
I would say it starts in very small steps.
Mhm.
And in my case, it was getting up and starting making a bed. It sounds silly, but I make sure that every day I make my own bed and make sure the house is cleaned in the morning so that my day shows, because I deal with setbacks every day with people, but in my own life, I have to make sure I can control that corner of it.
Mhm.
So, but I think the big thing is I think we like to think that we can be somehow do the major effort to save humanity. We all want to be heroes. If I were in Washington, here's what I would do. Or if I were in the state capitol, here's what I would do.
Mhm.
But I think what we did here was in cleaning the sidewalks in the winter was about the most heroic thing that I could do at the time. And nobody ever said a word, but I had control over my corner. And eventually, people began to notice that the neighborhood was no longer filled with people causing crime, that one house at a time, it began to change. I think it started with a snowblower.
Mhm.
So I would say start with wherever you are, doing whatever you can do, and just do something to the best of your ability to make your corner of your neighborhood better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's wonderful advice. And before I ask you what I ask all of my guests at the end of our conversation, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you want to make sure that listeners know or that you want to highlight?
I think right now in particular, there's a great deal of fear and anger. And I can't control Washington. I'll never speak before Congress. They wouldn't hear me if I did. But what I can do is I can help somebody in Walmart who may need help with carrying a bottle of water, a case of water, or I can open the door for somebody. Or sometimes it's stopping and helping somebody who needs help with a tire. It we used to see this a lot where people had flat tires on the highway, and I used to make a point of always trying to help where I could because it's the only way that I can combat the darkness is by offering some small degree of light in my little world.
Mhm.
I won't change the world, but maybe I can change my corner with just a flashlight. And that's what I would encourage people. It's not the large acts, it's the small acts of kindness. Dr. King would say that if you're a street sweeper, then what you do is you sweep that street as if Michelangelo was painting a picture. So that when people walk by your street, they'll say, there lives Michelangelo of street sweepers.
Mhm.
And that's what we try to do. We used our house as an example of a changed community so they would see what change looks like in men and women, but they could only see it in our house first.
Absolutely.
And truth is, now we have a house that's 150 years old, and it's become a model for the whole community.
It's amazing. It's amazing. What do you love most about the work that you do?
Mm. Interesting. I've thought a lot about that, and I'm by design an introvert. I
Mm.
don't like a lot of conversations with strangers. It's very hard for me. But what I try to do is if I can sit on the porch with one of my residents and just ask them, tell me about your kids. What is your goal? Do you want to get back with your kids or tell me where are they now? Or how can I help you reach your goals? And they'll talk for the next 20, 30, 40 minutes. And then at the end of that hour, they'll say, thank you for your advice. And I didn't offer anything. I just listened.
Yeah.
But I feel better. And I think this is exactly why we're doing this. It's not because I won't see any major changes in the prison population, but maybe if I can help somebody get a job. And I got a call from my very first resident last week, and he called me, and he's been gone for 24 years, and he's stayed out of prison. He's married. He raised his wife's children. He's got a job. He drives truck a long distance for UPS, and he called to say, "I read your book, and I want to say how much I enjoyed reading it, but it's also my way of saying thank you." And that was my first resident reaching back, and I thought, this is why we do it. It's not for the thank yous, but because maybe in a small way we made a difference, and that's really all that matters. And maybe he'll show up at my funeral.
Mm.
And maybe if I can have a couple homeless people show up at my funeral, then I know I've made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a life changed, right? I mean, that's just incredible. And what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh Lord, I, 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 my first instinct is I wasted a lot of years,
Mm.
but it really wasn't wasted in that I was able to learn from it. I wish I was able to start off with the same understanding without all the wasted years. I would listen more to people who knew more about what was the right thing to do. I would be a better listener. But to be quite candid, I'm not convinced that I would have those decisions made me who I am today, the good and the bad part.
Hmm.
In my novel, Daniel made a lot of mistakes, and my readers would write back and say, "I got so mad at Daniel. Why did he do that?" And the answer was, he did that because it was all he knew to do, but ultimately he changed.
Hmm.
And because at one point he said, "I have become as harmful as my tormentors were to me." And when he realized that, he was able to say, "Then I have to be the difference." And so maybe that's, in a sense, what we're trying to do is, it's not penance, but it's trying to help somebody else make the same good decisions earlier than I did.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a roundabout way to say it, but
Yeah,
yeah, we like to think that if we just made one decision different when we were 25, our life will be different.
right.
But I have a feeling that we it's not like Back to the Future, where suddenly the future is radically changed. I think it's forever changing, and it's a process, and we can not undo our mistakes, but we can become stronger in the broken places.
Mhm.
Maybe that's the key.
Yes, I think I love that. That's beautiful. And if people want to buy and read the book, if they want to support the Good Samaritan Home, if they want to learn more about you, how can people do that?
I would strongly encourage people to go to goodsamaritanhome.org.
Mhm.
It's a website, and it'll link you to newsletters and such, and you can learn about Good Samaritan Home. But also at johndavidgraham.com is where my website is. And I would encourage people to read the book, not because I want sales. There's no money in books, but I want people to discuss the issues in the book. I want them to discuss homelessness. I want them to understand broken families. I want them to understand second chances. And right now, it's free on Kindle.
Mm,
So if somebody wants to read a free book that I think will make a difference in their life, I would definitely encourage people. And then let me know what your thoughts are,
yeah, absolutely.
because the reviews coming back have been 4.6 out of 5 stars, which I consider, from readers, very good.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like that's a wonderful call to action is read the book, read it with friends, even if it's one friend, and discuss, right? Like these issues that we typically don't discuss and that if we're so lucky don't affect us, right? So I think that's a wonderful call to action and to have a better understanding and put more kindness and service out in the world. And this is one step that you can take to start understanding and seeing how you can impact that. We'll have all of your information in the show notes. And John, this has just been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for spending so much time and for everything that you're doing.
I I said earlier on that I was having basically a slow day,
Mhm.
but once we get talking about Good Samaritan Home, I just get very animated, because I feel that absolutely today, unto this hour, this message is critical, that we talk about second chances, because I I think we as a people are better than what we're seeing in the news. I think we can do better. I think we are better. And I think we just need an opportunity to show that we are better.
I think that's a wonderful place to end it. I agree with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I thank you for the opportunity, because truth is, you've made my day today. Thank you.
Oh, you made mine too, John. I'm so glad we got to meet. Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.